Welcome to the Sex Reimagined Podcast, where sex is shame-free and pleasure-forward. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sex Reimagined Podcast. I'm Dr. Willow Brown. I'm here with the one and only Leah Piper. We are your co-hosts. We are so grateful for all your wonderful likes, shares, and subscribe. Now, today, we have a little question for you. If your partner feels more like a roommate than a lover, then you're not alone. And today's guest says the real reason passion fades has nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with biology, miscommunication, and a few sneaky saboteurs no one is talking about. So we're so excited to welcome Dr. Diane Mueller, a board-certified sexologist with dual doctorates in naturopathic as well as acupuncture and oriental medicine. So I'm so excited about this conversation. And she is the founder of Sex Education Center, and she is mylibidodoc.com and hosts the Libido Lounge podcast, which we were guests on. And she really loves to help monogamous couples create more passion, desire, hotter sex, and better communication. So we are thrilled to have you with us today, Diane. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you ladies again. And, if I can real quickly, just open this up with a quick story on top of your amazing intro. One of the things that first started awakening me up to this topic we're talking about today around sex actually getting better in long-term relationships instead of worse was when I was listening to a lecture with the co-founder of NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, Richard Bandler. And he was telling a story of when he was getting ready to get married. And people were like, well, you better have a lot of sex now because it's going to go away later. Like the sex is going to go down, 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 down. And his response to this that he was teaching just really awakened something in me. And his response was, okay, so anything else in life that we do, we learn a new instrument and we practice, we get better. We learn a new language, we practice, we get better. So he's like, so sex is this one thing that you practice and get worse at. And so it didn't make any sense to him and it didn't make any sense to me. And that was a huge launch, that kind of concept for a lot of the work I do today.
I love that. It's such a good story. And it's so true. It's like practicing sexuality is a practice. It's a practice of getting to know yourself in newer and more intriguing ways day by day and getting to know your partner.
The first thing that comes to mind when I hear you say that is, yes, but what is the neurological differences between someone practicing an instrument versus someone having sex, where we've got lots of different brain chemistry being generated in relationship to sex? And I'm curious, is that different when you're practicing or are passionate about something like learning to practice an instrument, or maybe for me would be cooking? Any of the doctors in the room know the answer to that question?
Well, I've been asked this before. So the way I describe the answer to this is think about learning guitar and learning the G chord. And the way you practice guitar is not practicing the G chord over and over and over and over again. You add a C, you add a D, you add an A minor, and you keep adding new things. And that's how you get better at guitar. So the difference is that when we are often practicing sex, we're making love, that oftentimes, because if left to our own devices, what we wind up doing is we get into a sexual script and we just practice the G chord over and over and over again. And if we did that with guitar, well, we would get really good at the G chord. We would not be a great guitar player.
And we'd get bored. Yes. Which is probably
and
some of
people
the
would get bored
biggest
listening
issues,
to us.
right, in long-term relationship sex, as you get into that routine and you get bored. Great answer, by the way. Really
Yeah, that's a good one. It's a great metaphor. Yeah. Yeah, we love the metaphor of learning to play an instrument is so synonymous to sexuality because it does become an orchestra and a really well fine-tuned musician who knows how to play multiple instruments. Like the music moves through them rather than them playing the instruments. The instruments are playing through them, and the same thing in sexuality, especially with tantric, spiritually connected sex. It's like the energy of the sexuality starts to move you and play through you rather than you doing it. It starts out as you doing it, but then you get into this trance state where it takes over.
I like
Yeah.
that correlation you made there, Willow. Because it is interesting when people are learning sexual techniques and conscious sexuality and things like Taoist practices and Tantra practices, where you become skillful as a lover. It's like that learning process of practicing and learning new skill sets and then finding the embodied knowledge to allow that practice to be so internalized that it's no longer a skill or a technique you're doing, it's a way that you express yourself. And but there is always sort of that learning curve of playing a guitar or learning a new sexual technique, let's say G-spot massage or prostate massage, where you're a little klutzy at first. You don't have the rhythm. You don't know how to find the beat until you practice enough where it's like, oh, I know how to tap this. I know how to take someone on a ride when it comes to their pleasure and how they're opening and what they're feeling and so on and so forth. So I'm curious, Diane. I know that you are an acupuncturist and you've got this holistic practice. Where does this interfacing with couples start from? Or is it more therapeutic in nature? Are you teaching them skills in the bedroom so that they're better at sex? What's the first door you're opening for folks?
It's a great question. And it's a challenging one, right? Because a lot of my work is really combining like the medical, the science, the lab stuff with all the sexy stuff. So I find that like in the programs and my courses, I do give people access to a lot of things typically at once. And so we do go through and say, well, are there hormone imbalances? Do you have sympathetic dominance, which most humans do? Is your overwhelm running your life? Do you have neurological issues or pelvic floor dysfunctions? Like those kind of like physical things, which have to be addressed. And at the same time, the number of times people have re-regulated their hormones and they're hormonally perfect, but their libido is low, they're still not like, their desires down. It's too many to count. So we know that those things are helpful and important to be in line, but the way we bring novelty in, the way we actually communicate with our partner, the way we set time aside for our pleasure practice, all of these things actually make a big difference with the arousal and the libido. So in my work, a lot of what I do is give people access to all these areas. And I often find that the place to start is the place that people feel most called to. So if you tend to be more of like, wow, you love the science and all that, like everybody should look at the medical side of things because it can be impactful. But if your brain works in more that analytical way, you might be better like starting there just to kind of get some movement and then adding on these other areas and other people that maybe are more like they feel the energy, right? And they just want to, they're so much more interested in actually the embodiment side of things. They might do better starting over in this other area to practice that. Because I find that it's just like this very like beautiful meld of energy like flowing in different ways, and meaning there's not like one fundamental thing I've seen with arousal and libido where it's like you have to do this first or it doesn't work.
Yeah, I love that. You're a girl after my own heart here.
Yeah.
I love, love, love.
Whoa.
It's so all inclusive, It's like, and
Yeah.
we just jump in as we learn in Chinese medicine. It's like it's a big circle, and you just jump into the center of it, and you start Pac-Manning your way out from there. You start taking nibblies here and there, and you digest what you can, and you assimilate what you can in the moment. And then when you're ready for the next space, you move on to the next space. And every human being is so different. I always think of humans as these 4 pillars of spiritual, emotional, psychological, and physical. And so if you're really down in the dumps with your physicality and your fucking hormones are driving you absolutely cuckoo sauce, then yeah, you're going to want to start there. But if you're like, "Yeah, I have a little bit of brain fog and I get some night sweats, but hey, I've got sexual repressed trauma that I haven't dealt with and I know that," then yeah, you're going to want to dive into that psychological, spiritual component first.
I think it's interesting too because it makes sense that people are going to want to start where they feel their strengths. So if they love sort of the physiological, neurological science of things, that's where they feel safe and comfortable. They get to kind of feel that's where they're comfortable. They're in their comfort zone first. And then you can kind of take a look at, okay, now let's see where I need to be challenged. And I'm sure when you're working with couples, right, you've got 2 different people who have their own comfort zones and who might hopefully nudge their partner to get out of their comfort zone. It's interesting. Matt and I have been interviewing some therapists. We've been together for 10 years, married for 8 as of this recording.
This is
And we're like, yeah, we need to tune up. We started our relationship seeing a therapist because we were doing awesome. And we had the idea like, people should go to therapy like when they're doing great, because it's when they're challenged that it's a little bit harder to learn skills. So it's been interesting. We're like, yeah, it's time for a tune up, and taking a look and being really honest, like, oh, I feel really uncomfortable here. This is where like I know I need to be pushed a little bit. Where are your clients and patients? Where is their resistance? Where do you find people most resistant to taking the next leap?
Oh, it's a great question. And honestly, the answer is all over the board.
Everywhere.
All over
It's
the map.
everywhere. It's like, like what you were saying, Dr. Willow, around like Chinese medicine. Like I look at it as like following the qi, right? That's what we say in Chinese medicine, is like you pay attention to the qi. And so it's the energy. And I think, to your point, Leah, around like safety and resistance, I think one of the biggest things for people is understanding that, hey, like beginning to differentiate, hey, this is resistance because maybe I'm not ready to go here, versus like this is resistance because this is hard. And
Right.
to determine that next step. And I do think it's helpful to do this work as a couple, because like you said, couples come into this at different spots and different places, and oftentimes have different, strengths versus, challenge and growth areas. So we can kind of support each other and help each other. And I think one of the biggest things in like doing any of the work is starting in many ways. If something is challenging, then coming back to the body and, doing tantric practices, doing breath work, doing other embodiment practices. And the more we can be in our body and actually approach this from that standpoint, then if something is challenging, then the way I encourage people to do that is like move to this next step and see if you can like stay in your body and stay like with any intensity. And if you're popping out, meaning if you're becoming disembodied and all of a sudden you're kind of like checking out, you're getting spacey, you're not able to stay present in the moment, that might be a sign that, this is like pushed past your safety threshold. And maybe we need like a different way in. Maybe we need to talk about this different, maybe you need to start at a different point. So that embodiment and that ability to practice that, which I think is something that is a continued practice for all of us, is a huge signal for the individual to decide, hey, yeah, this is differentiating from I'm safe to do this even though it's hard, versus like maybe there is a level of like smart wisdom in my body saying maybe I'm not ready to go here yet.
That's a really important distinction. It makes my Chinese medicine brain go to the small intestine, like the great discerner, and it's this place inside of us of, the old adages of like, listen to your gut, what's your gut telling you, and it's sort of like it's the enteric brain of the body, like the original brain of the body where we kind of, develop from. And so, listening to that first instinct, that first gut reaction of like, I have resistance because I'm afraid of what's on the other side and I don't know how to surrender through that resistance. I need help with that, versus I have resistance and it's so deep. I can feel it in my bones, and it means I'm not there. I'm not ready for that.
I'm
yet.
not resourced enough to process
Yeah.
maybe this piece. Like,
Mhm.
I need to be grounded more. I need to be better resourced. I need to have certain types of support in order to feel safe, even though I'm doing something scary or hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I love the Chinese medicine for that as well. It's the physical of that is like sorting the good from the not needed in our food, right? And it's like
Yeah.
that same energetics. It's like information comes in, and the small intestine energy and a healthy small intestine chi is going to be able to do that emotionally, mentally, with information to say, oh,
Mhm.
this is useful to me, versus like, this actually doesn't resonate with me, which we
Mhm.
need to apply, I think, every day.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that phrase is being able to sort out the good versus the not needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
Separating the
such a
pure
positive,
from the impure.
powerful,
Yeah.
way of saying something. And it really shines the light. Like, I can't help but reflect on my own life. Like, I'm craving different things, and like sort of the junk that I usually indulge in I'm noticing I don't even want that. That's like, it's not needed at this time. Something else, something good is different that is calling for my attention. And I'm so happy that it's linking to my desire. Um, okay.
Diane,
So
how did you
yeah.
get, I want to hear let's roll back. Let's zoom out. Let's talk about your Genesis story and like how you got into sexology, how you got into healing, how you got into naturopath, Chinese medicine, all the things.
I grew up real Catholic. I was super religious. And so, sex before marriage, masturbation, any of that was very wrong. My genitals were just down there, kind of conversation. And when I went to college, I had a really good friend who became my roommate. And I started having this unknown vulvar pain. And I say unknown because I, went to docs and everybody was like, well, there's no infection, there's no disease, there's no problem. But this pain was keeping me up at night. It would get really bad at night. And so my friend, my roommate at the time, after, me confiding in her, about this continually and my frustration, she handed me a book. And the book was Betty Dodson's Sex for One.
Mm.
And, for anybody listening that has read this book, you may remember that in that book, Betty talks about not only the power of masturbation, but she talks about her experience of pain and other symptoms going away. And so, reading this and kind of struggling, I was like, all right, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to try self-pleasure. And that was my first experience with masturbation.
Mm.
And lo and behold, the pain went away.
Wow.
Right
And
away?
then an orgasm. It was just like self-pleasure. I was just like, okay, this is amazing. And then next day, pain was back. Try it again. Pain went away again. So I did this for a period of several days. I don't remember the specific number, but eventually the pain just went away totally. And, these moments in life where it's like all beliefs leading to a point, and then there's something that like challenges a belief and it like completely crumbles. It was
Yeah.
like, one of those kind of moments where I was like, okay, so there's this energy. We call it spirit, God, universe, whatever anybody calls it. And this energy that's supposed to be like making me like, super powerful and, perfect in their eyes and all these things, perfectly imperfect and all of that stuff. How could I have this thing that is a way to heal myself that is bad for me? So that it was just so impactful. So that's when I started reading books and, getting my hands on whatever, I could and talking to whatever let me, which back in those days was like, everything was so, this was the late 90s, early 2000s. So things were really taboo back then, even more so than now. But that was the original Genesis story.
I'm wondering if people listening who are experiencing vulvar pain, can you talk about what that sensation was like? Was it just like in the labial lips? Could you feel it in the pelvic floor? What was that pain? Can you describe the sensation?
Yeah, it was not just the lips. It was like deep internal. Like I think, now with more of an anatomical knowledge, I think it was all the way even into my bladder area, right? So it was very deep. It was very internal. And it wasn't like this, like the sensation's a little hard to describe because it wasn't like this, like sharp, like a pinched nerve, anything like that. It was almost like this, I guess gripping would be the right word.
Okay.
It was like almost this like gripping sensation that was just there. And it wasn't on a scale of how bad. It was by no means like a 10 out of 10 with it being like severe like that. But it was just like that continued, like the other way I would describe it is I was constantly aware of my vulva and vagina, almost like when you stub a toe and the pain starts going away, but your brain's still thinking about the toe. Like
Okay.
that's another way I would describe it, where my brain was just like, there's my vagina, there's my vulva. Like my brain was
Wow,
just constantly
interesting.
aware of like something's wrong here.
How long is it going on?
It's hard to say because it was so long ago. 6 months, maybe something like
Okay.
that.
So it
You know-
just kind of came on all of a sudden?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No
Interesting.
known reason. Never figured it out.
Very
Wow.
interesting.
So it was like
Yeah.
a tight gripping ache versus a sharp shooting burny or electrical
Now, did you ever
feeling.
think about later on as you were getting into the meridian system, did you ever think about like, oh yeah, well, the liver runs through the genitals. I was really stressed at that time. Hadn't done a liver cleanse, wasn't eating well,
Yeah.
anything along those lines?
I mean, it was, that was definitely during my rock star party days. So all of that was very,
Liver was
very
activated.
liver was
It's
activated.
working hard.
Certainly, I think bladder, kidney,
Bladder,
meridian were
kidney.
probably involved as well.
So
The
some fear, maybe.
fear, the ability to, sink deep. And even when we think about like, the kidney energy is, it's like that deep yin. It's like that ability to really sink in deeply. That super watery, intuitive type of energy. And like symptom wise, it coming out at night, for example, that could have been an impactful part of it as well.
So interesting.
fascinating.
So that orgasm really helped move that stagnant chi, do you think?
Well, even just the sensation, because I don't believe, I know that first night I didn't orgasm, and I don't have any memory of actually orgasming any of that time. I didn't really know how to orgasm at all back then. I'd never experienced orgasm. So I don't even think that I had an orgasm any of the times I was doing it, if I remember correctly. I think it was just bringing more circulation and more awareness. And, I was breathing. I remember breathing a lot and whatnot, and just feeling in, that area. Maybe there was some level of release with the tissue,
Sure.
tightening and then releasing. So, mechanistically, that's kind of how I've thought about it. But from a standpoint of like orgasm, I don't even remember orgasming then, which just shows like the power of this. Like we know how powerful orgasm is. But also is just even like the touch along the way.
Right, exactly.
Right. I think that I'm glad you mentioned that, because that can be really underestimated, just the power of bringing our conscious touch, our awareness and our breath to this private part of our body that is oftentimes shrouded in fear, guilt, and shame. And that can just be creating a holding pattern all by itself, is just our cultural conditioning around how we feel about our genitals.
When I decided that I was going to, really turn this into a business and really, put a lot more energy into getting this work and this information out to the world, which was at the end of my marriage and into my next partnership. So when my marriage ended, like towards the end of that, we were polyamorous. So we had opened up our relationship, and we both had different reasons to do so. For me, my main objective with that was I was not feeling like the relationship was working for me, and that we were in a place that I thought was fixable. And so I was just trying to figure out, like, is there an alternative solution that I can be still in this and still get some of the other things like filled up in my life that I felt like were essential to me that were just not happening in my partnership. And it ended up not because of polyamory. That actually was, I would say, very successful from a standpoint of how we were communicating on that. But it ended up for several reasons turning, kind of messy and pretty hard towards the end. And my partner, who I was with, who I'm still with now in a monogamous relationship, he was just amazing at any of the stress. And I had a lot of career stress going on. We owned a business together. We were working on separating that, which was just messy.
Yeah.
And my partner was just giving me profound orgasms. And I would be so stressed and not being able to sleep and not being able to sleep and not being able to sleep. And he was basically, I would, say, healing me with touch, with pleasure, with orgasms. In part, too, his approach to me with all of this, the way that he was able to create so much safety for me. And I was feeling very unsafe in my life. And the mental and physical ways that he, like physically meaning his presence, that he was able to show up and create safety, also continue to put energy into the depth that I was able to go into orgasms, the length of orgasms that I was able to maintain, those kind of things. And so it really is like a type A, sympathetic, like, I have 2 doctorate degrees, I have bazillion certifications. Like, I am not a sit home and do nothing kind of woman.
Mhm.
And I don't tend to like move into that parasympathetic world very easily. I tend to like thrive on like productivity and overwhelm. So to actually,
Hands can raise their hand and relate.
so to like have this experience, to have somebody in the state, which was one of the more intense, stressful periods of my life, and have somebody really show me the depths of what pleasure can do for bringing down that overwhelm, for resetting my nervous system, for preparing me for whatever challenges came that next day to be resourced. It took everything that I had already been studying, and it really showed me like the level of healing on a completely different level. And that's when I was like, all right, I better start sharing this with the world, because like you said, like who out there is not this current society? So many of us, most of us are living in this hyper sympathetic fight or flight overwhelm a lot.
Healed by orgasms.
Yeah.
Yes. And those
I love it.
profound experiences with a partner who's so present and who's so safe and who probably has some skills, that all come to play together, who's really invested in you being all that you can be, and it gets to bask in your pleasure as like probably one of the greatest rewards. There's a certain evolved partner who can provide that and anchor that for someone else's nervous system.
Mhm.
And I'm curious to hear from you, what made that possible for him to show up for you in that way?
Yeah, it's such a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. Like, I have studied a lot of Alison Armstrong's work
Mhm.
and her work on understanding men and understanding women. And this relationship was the first time I really felt like I was applying it fully.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so there was a level of going into it. And instead of seeing, as Allison would say, where it's like, it's so easy as women, because we don't understand men, to look at men as in comparing them to like the perfect woman,
Mhm.
right? And instead of actually realizing like, oh, this is actually how their brains, function differently. It's like, her work, I feel like, blows other work on the feminine masculine just out of the world from understanding the thinking process.
Yeah.
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 So
And
there
how to
was
lift your
definitely
partner up in a
there.
very specific way that their systems can receive.
Yeah,
Her
helping
work
them
is
to be
really unique that way.
successful,
Mhm.
it's like it's like made me fall in love, like not only with him, but with the masculine in general, because I understand men in such a different way, and understand that like, oh, like men are amazing at like really wanting to, like a really embodied man is amazing at really wanting to provide so many things for his partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Another person who Allison is always kind of touting is Luann Bresendine. She wrote The Male Brain and the Female Brain. I'm sure you've read those books,
I have
Diane.
actually not read those
Oh,
books.
you gotta
They're
read
So
those
you're giving
two
me good
books.
homework. I'm gonna order
Yeah,
those as soon as
you
we
are
stop this.
they're gonna be candy to you, because it goes through, and she's a brain neuroscientist, and so she
Yeah.
just really goes through
Yeah.
how the amygdala works, how how the corpus callosum works in the male and female brains, how
Mhm.
the different chemicals run through the body. And I have given those books, Allison's work and those two books, to so many people, and even moms of teenage boys, and they're like, oh, I get it now, and it's like, we really are such like the male brain, the female brain, we really are such different creatures, and we see things so differently. So to understand, and Allison has given such a huge gift to the world. We're such big fans as well of her work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, she's
Mm.
amazing.
We'll list Allison's episode on Sex Reimagined here in the show notes. For those of you who aren't familiar with her work, you'll really delight in that interview. Yeah. Okay. So Allison's work was a big influence. Was there anything else that he brought to the table that you think men or women who are listening to this would gain value by maybe adopting some of the things he brought to the table, or learning some of the things that he had skills with coming into the relationship?
here was a huge and unique thing about my partner is, and it wasn't just was, is I should say, he is deaf. So he actually lost his hearing when he was an infant of meningitis. And what that means in our relation, he's an amazing lip reader, right? So he could be here talking to any of us and, and can read lips extremely well. But what that means is that in order for him to understand me, I can't talk a million miles an hour. I can't talk like this because he can't read my lips that way. And this whole thing that like we're taught as humans around like slow down, think about what you're going to say, all these kind of things, it forced me to develop that skill because
Wow.
if I would say something too fast, he'd be like, I can't hear you, honey. And then I'd have to go back. And sometimes I'd even get a second shot at saying things because I said it fast and maybe not well. And it was like, oh, okay, now here's my opportunity to go back and practice.
Cool.
So I had a natural cue built in to my
What a
relationship, right?
what a cool way to bring the sympathetic dominant down into the parasympathetic.
Exactly.
That's great.
Exactly. And so,
Wow.
from a standpoint of this is not what most couples are going to be in, but even just thinking about, okay, is there any sort of cue that if you're going to have a challenging conversation, like, do you want to consider having a special sound that like, oh, we're going to have a challenging conversation, maybe throw some Tibetan bell, Tibetan music on where there's just like a bell every once in a while. And every time you hear the bell, that's a trigger for you to remember, slow myself down because it was unbelievable. And now, we're 4.5 years in, so I'm very acclimated to this. But in the beginning, it was so, so amazing how many times I would find myself jumping and leaping without thinking, without choosing my words really thoughtfully. And it forced me to do that.
Wow,
Are you an
that's really
Aries by
cool.
chance?
I'm not. I'm actually a Cancer.
Oh, you are.
People
You
are
got
very surprised by
the
that.
flow watery in you,
Yep.
actually. Well, that's have been such a relief to your nervous system to start to be, like, to actually embody and be in practice of slowing down. And I imagine, too, that it changed the way that you delivered your message and taught to your students and your clients and patients.
100%. Yeah, I spend a lot more time now just like internally. How is my cadence? Like, am
Mhm.
I talking faster than people keep up with me? Because like I said, I'm type A and you get me going. My natural tendency is like, running on a train that's like completely lost its brakes just as fast as can be.
Mm. So tell us about your work. Like, if you're pulling from all these amazing different modalities, what's one of your favorite things that you get to help people with and teach them and guide them through?
I love talking about the brain and the high that we get in new relationship energy and dopamine and what dopamine is doing to drive that chemical change in the beginning of the relationship. Because I think from a standpoint of getting out of our sexual scripts and bringing more novelty in and back to how we introduced this particular conversation around, okay, well, how do we not get in the G chord, right? How do we continue to add new things? Well, some of that is understanding what drives passion, and a lot of the beginning part of that new relationship energy is because of not only the novelty, but it's like the space, because how dopamine works, and dopamine's our reward as well as our motivation brain chemical. And so in that new relationship, when we don't know if they're going to call, we don't know if they're going to text, and we're like thinking about it, and there's kind of a motivation, there's a little dopamine saying, I hope they call, I hope they call, I hope they call, and then they call. And then ping, it's a ton more dopamine. And then it's like you get that anticipatory for that date. And the same thing happens for, are they going to text after the date and the first kiss and all the things. And so one of the things that happens when we combine and we move in together or combine our lives in any way, we are taking away kind of that space and that anticipation. Right. And that's where like adding the novelty back in is so helpful. But it's not just about that new thing. It's not just about the C chord and the D chord and those new chords. It's about the way we introduce those chords, because the more we can say, okay, this is where planning can be sexy, because the more we can do things around like, okay, well, on, Friday night, we're going to try tying me up for the first time, or, any new thing that's interesting. Then if we talk about that, doing that on a Monday, then what that's doing is it's bringing back that dopamine. So then we start thinking about it, and maybe we start flirt texting again, and it brings that dopamine. And so what we're doing is we're creating that space between now and this exciting thing, and allowing the brain to think about it and get used to it and get like excited about it. And then when it happens, we get that big rush of dopamine. And by applying those same principles from a new relationship energy to a long-term scenario, we're able to create in many ways a lot of that chemical drive that we had early on.
I love that. So powerful. And so with your couples who are coming to you, they've been together a long time. They're like, yeah, we just go down the same G chord all the time. What should we do? Are you giving them those kind of things? Why don't you guys try trying each other up on Friday night?
Yeah.
Like, are you giving them actual like techniques like shibari and tantra techniques and things like that to play
Very
with?
much so. Very
So-
much so. I guess starting place for people is my yes, no, maybe checklist. And that's at my sexdoc.com for anybody that wants that. But even with that, like one of the important things let me take a step back. In the yes, no, maybe checklist, what it is you take this and you say, oh, these are the things that we're both interested in. These are the maybes. Are there anything that a maybe could be shifted to turn a maybe into a yes, or how would a maybe become a no? But one of the important things I think about having support, from you guys, from people like myself, through any of this is just like anything. If we are having the conversations around, well, you are a yes and I'm a maybe, we could have to be so careful about how we have these conversations, because the ego gets so involved. So it's very, very important before we try these conversations or we do something like a yes, no, maybe checklist, that we have a conversation around, if you think something I bring up that I'm interested in is maybe a little weird or it's surprising to you or anything like that, we can actually pre-frame this and say, this is how I want you to respond to me if you're surprised by what I say. And the reason we do that is because it can be if we don't have these conversations well, it can be such a trigger for people to be like, oh my gosh, like I am like turned off by that and my partner likes that. And like, it can be so easy for somebody to spout something out of their mouth that creates a trauma for the other person. And they were so vulnerable and now they shut down. So before we even do that, we got to pre-frame, this is how we're going to respond in those scenarios.
That's gold right there.
What's a good example? Could you actually give us an example of a frame that maybe some languaging that a couple or maybe even people who are dating for the first time as they kind of break into communication styles?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. And then the other thing in, considering this as a listener is always make this, of course, true and authentic for you. So the example I give may or may not resonate with you, but just as a starting point. So a good thing to ask for somebody is something like curiosity. So curiosity can be a useful way of having these kind of responses. So for example, let's say I'm going to ask my partner to tie me up. And my partner has never heard this before, and I'm worried about how he's going to respond. So I might pre-frame and say, hey, let's do our yes, no, maybe checklist. I want to tell you a little bit about some of these things that came up as yeses for me. There's a couple of things that I feel a little nervous to tell you about. I've never told anybody about this, and it just feels like really scary to me. So even if you don't like it, I'm wondering if you can, if you're not liking something, I'm wondering if you can say, wow, what a beautiful expression. I am like so curious about, your interest in exploring this. And do you have any sense of like, what this would do for you or why you're interested in it? And maybe I'm not into this. I'm not really sure, or this might be a hard no for me. I'm not sure, but But this is such a beautiful expression of sexuality. And even if I can't do this, I'm really interested in knowing why this is alive for you. Something like that.
That would
Yeah.
be a much better response than I'm a no.
Yeah.
Right.
Or that's weird. Or why
Right.
would you
Yeah,
want
shut
that?
it down.
It's that
Causing unnecessary shame. We don't want that.
right, right. Yeah, I think as we like to always say, curiosity suffocates judgment.
Yeah.
And what we all really want is to be understood and gotten. And so even though you may want to yuck my yum,
Yeah. Great. Well said.
resist that expression of yuck and allow yourself to get really curious. Well, I'm really invested and I really care about this person and I want to know more. I want to understand you even more. And I can hold space for your desire without feeling pressured to fulfill your desire.
Yes.
Just the liberation of seeking what do I desire deep within ourselves, and then taking the next step and having courage to then explore what it feels like to say what those desires are out loud is such a step of bravery. And to be able to hear yourself have that experience out loud, and for you to be with someone who says, your desires are safe with me, even if they're not my desires. I care enough about you in this moment right now to know you more and to get what this is about for you.
Yeah, it's
What a
so
gift.
there's so much capacity, I think, for depth, that can happen from those questions when we don't shut it down because, even like asking somebody like, what is interesting about this, for you? I'm really curious, right? And
Yeah.
maybe they don't know, like we don't know the reason for there might not be a reason for all of our fantasies. Sometimes it's just like, well, that sounds sexy and hot. So there might not be anything to be said, but there might be, right? And sometimes we ask the question around, what is it? And the shibari is so interesting, right? Like the idea of being tied up. And many, many people have an experience with it of when you're actually restrained like that, of actually feeling safe and held.
Right.
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 And so
Not trapped. They
not
actually
trapped.
feel held. It's very fascinating how upon looking at something for the first time, you might have associations when you actually look into it even deeper, for many people, it could be an opposite association. And then to find out, well, when did you first have that desire? And what does that remind you of? And can open up just so much closeness.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And just go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and that's why people do it generally is to drop themselves into that subspace. I'm guessing, I'm imagining for you, Diane, that going into subspace is like really a powerful thing for you since you do run at a young, dominant sort of drive and natural nervous system. And I've been doing cranial sacral for couple decades now. And, taking people into that deep, deep relaxation. Well, whereas a lot of times they kind of like go asleep or they go into this, liminal space. So, and then the practitioner is kind of like walking their nervous system deeper and deeper into this subspace. But what I have found myself from playing with subdom roles and containment and going in is like you actually get to walk yourself into that subspace. And there's something really unique and powerful about that to allow somebody to tie you up, to contain you, to hold you, to surrender into the container of someone else. Really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really good example of how one of the things I say a lot is pleasure is not just about desire, but something we require. And I say that for several reasons, but one of them is perfectly illustrated by, what you're bringing up, which is how much healing can actually happen from everything from a standpoint of physical intimacy, expression, not even, of course, just, way beyond just penetration.
Sex, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think that's a really interesting and defining distinction that is worth exploring a little bit. And I also have another question I don't want to miss asking you. But to make this point first is that we can learn new tricks, techniques, and lovemaking positions, right? To activate our partner and to open our partner to more pleasure. But when you bring up the healing component, what it does to me is it deepens something so that how we play with each other sexually has more meaning. Not just friction, and friction is awesome, and learning about all the science and what happens to the brain and how we build arousal and attraction and all that stuff. We also have so much incredible information at our fingertips that can explain neurologically and physiologically what's happening, the science of our attraction, our arousal, and seeking more pleasure and higher pleasure. But that separate from sort of the healing aspects and the spiritual or the sacred aspects makes some of that devoid of meaning. And we are meaning-making machines as humans. And so I think we get to take partnership and intimacy to a much deeper level when we can apply some meaning to it. And so your yes, no, maybe checklist is it also provides an opportunity for us to discover deep inside of ourselves what meaning we make from these, attractions, desires, curiosities, yearnings, longings, so on and so forth, or big fat no's.
What's on the checklist? I want to know what's on that checklist.
I want a checklist, and I want to know, how do you help someone who's really stuck in their yuck? Who hears
That's a great
something that their
question.
partner says that is like really big for them, and they just have an aversion or a disgust, and they get really stuck and going,
Yeah,
how
like they
could you
can't even
possibly want
find their
that?
way to curiosity around it.
Yeah. The answer to that, there's so many different places we can go, of course, like any of these questions. But one of my favorite ways to help people with that is really linked in my mind to, to without getting too sciencey, but to what is happening to the brain with intimacy from a standpoint of like meditation and an altered state. Because when we are really embodied, right, when we are practicing mindfulness throughout our intimacy and the mind wanders for a second, we catch it and we bring it right back to our body and the sensations, and we're doing that. As we get into these more altered states and, the more liminal space that gets created, like you had mentioned, Dr. Willow, when all of this happens, just like with hypnosis, our brain is more suggestible. So one of my favorite healing practices that I love to do with my partner is to bring up anything that is, on my mind around like a belief that I'm like, this is not serving me. I need to reprogram the heck out of this. Maybe there's a micro trauma I have from something he said or something somebody else said, and it's like in my consciousness, whatever it is. And I think about and I talk openly with him around like, wow, this is what I want to program my nervous system with. This is the belief. And so then at moments with intimacy, as like he can tell that energy is heightened, he will whisper, in this very soothing, very parasympathetic dominant voice while I'm in my body, while I'm connected to my, my parasympathetic nervous system. He will be whispering these mantras in my ear and like helping me reprogram my brain. So obviously, if a partner is involved in a micro trauma like this, if they said something that did not feel good and we're creating a story and a belief and a meaning, which we do as humans, our partner has to show up. So this activity is, in some ways like an advanced activity for people. But if you're at a point where your partner is like, you have that type of communication and your partner is willing to play here, it's a really fun way of actually reprogramming the nervous system and the belief and the story while you guys are being intimate and making love. Yeah.
Amazing.
And then on my yes, no, maybe checklist, it's an interesting checklist because there's a lot of things on there that are not about sex. So it's intimacy. And so it's various things for, would you consider this for a date night? And then there's different places. Like the way I look at novelty oftentimes is people, places, things, and things that fall into those three categories. So things could be anything such as ropes or anything in the BDSM world. It could be vibrators. It could be handcuffs. It could be anything that's a thing. Places is obvious. I'd like to help people remember that places can be as simple as like in your closet instead of in your bed, right? It can be super small changes. And then people. So I do work with monogamous couples most primarily. So the way I help people in monogamy get into the role of using people from a novelty standpoint is through role playing is one way. Through even doing things like wigs or costume play can be another thing. So you're taking another persona. And I really love bringing in like archetypes from Sensual Dance or from S Factor, from Sheila Kelly's work. And the archetypes, I think, are so wonderful. They're so phenomenal to play with because they're almost like these, these different personas and parts of us. So, for example, one archetype in S Factor lineage is the dangerous challenger. And the dangerous challenger is kind of what she sounds like, right? She's kind of like ferocious. She's like, she's a boss. She's a little dangerous. She's edgy.
In my mind, she has a whip in her hand.
Yeah,
like a
she
big
might be wearing
bullwhip.
leather, right?
Yeah, she's wearing leather.
In my mind, she's topping from the bottom
Yeah.
like a little bird.
That's exactly right. So it's like the dangerous challenger energy is going to be different in all of us. And
Mhm.
so it's a really fun thing to kind of get to know these archetypes. Like, another one's an innocent teaser. And I think of that, like for me, that's like the, almost like the high school cheerleader, right? Like that type of vibe. And, almost kind of getting yourself in that state around, we all have these archetypes in us, some of them more dominant than other, like any, like just about any archetypical model out there. And so when we can actually learn about these and be like, okay, well, how am I going to sink into the energy of the innocent teaser? And how would the innocent teaser show up tonight? And how would she move? And how would she make love? And how would she express?
Mhm.
And, it's interesting. Sometimes I play with this without even like telling my partner, and he'll be like, what were you doing? What was that? So
I like that. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Love
Well,
this factor.
I
I
love-
love the archetypes that they've come
I
up
know.
with.
I love that you're bringing the archetypes to our
Yeah.
conversation right now, because it's like we get to put on a mask. Like we get to put on a different persona, a different part of ourselves that we don't usually give ourselves. Oh, I'm not that. I'm not an innocent teaser. I'm not a challenger, like that's not me. But let me put that on and play that part and see what part of me comes alive when I play that role. I just did the Light Dark Institute's work with their Darketype stuff, and the similar kind of, archetype, like the violent destroyer, and the challenger and the needy wretch. Oh my God, I need your love so bad. I'm never gonna be able to live without it. It's just like it feels good to just allow yourself to go into these different places inside that we all carry, because otherwise they're just lurking in the shadow. They're staying in the unconscious, and then somehow they creep into our, relationships with each other and cause a little bit of discord.
Yeah, I think Carl Jung really got it right with the shadow on that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, this has been so much fun, and your work is so fascinating. We feel so touched and honored to have you on the show. Is there anything else you want to leave our audience with? Any other gem or treasure that maybe they could noodle over or even practice?
Yeah. Well, two things. One, I do encourage everybody to go take my libido quiz, because that's going to help you identify some of those root causes behind low libido. So it's a free quiz at libidoquiz.com. So I
Great.
do encourage you to do that. And secondly, get comfortable with the fact that sometimes it is awkward. I think, the avoiding awkward sex and avoiding those awkward moments, and especially if somebody has not been trying something for a while, or maybe you haven't been having sex or intimacy for a while, maybe you're just, in this best friend kind of role, it can feel awkward. And like, without having all that energy of that new relationship energy, it's almost like starting sometimes with the first kiss without all of that energy, and you have to figure out, how do your lips fit together again sometimes, and
Banging
how do
your
you
teeth
respond
together.
to their style? Right.
Yeah.
However, still things happen. Like my partner and I banged our heads together during sex the other day and had to take a break because it really hurt. That was like an awkward transition, right? And so,
Yeah.
so I think the more we can just accept that when we're trying new things or when we're starting over, that it's just being awkward doesn't have to be a bad thing. We can make it silly. We can, we can laugh about it and just bring that acceptance into this is actually a normal part of trying new things. Not everything's going to work, and not expecting it to, look like a, perfect movie porn shot all the time, because that's just not realistic.
Yeah. And remember, awkward can be charming. And there's a lot of erotic innocence
funny.
and awkward, and it can be lots of great fodder for laughter. And yes, who doesn't want to be confident? But it's kind of unrealistic in every situation. And sex is the perfect place for us to yearn for confidence, but really be awkward. So just embrace that on your way to confidence. I love that.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And where can people find your yes, no, maybe checklist?
So that's at mysexdoc.com. So super easy.
Yep.
Great.
And that's free
Perfect.
also?
Free also. 2
free gifts, 1 episode. That is exciting. We'll make sure that's in the show notes.
Thank you, Diane. Such a pleasure to have you today.
Same. Thank you, ladies.
Okay, stay tuned because the dish is up next, and you know how much we like to dish it out.
Now, our favorite part, the dish.
Well, wasn't that just a yummy taster? Little.
So good. Love Diane.
good.
I love talking to her. She's just she plays in the realm of so many things that I hold near and dear to my heart. So hormones and Chinese medicine and BDSM and the archetypes, and just kept going and going with it all.
Yeah.
It's great. And like the neuroscience. She's real into the neuroscience. I love that. It's super fun.
And
Allison
the archetypes and
Armstrong.
Allison Armstrong. I mean, so many realms
come
that
on.
line up,
She's a sister.
Yeah, a sister from another mister, for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, I really loved a lot of the things she brought to the table. That, just embrace awkwardness is so key. Being able to choose curiosity when you're learning about your partner and some of the things they're uncovering about what titillates them. Coming from a non-judgmental space, the yearning to be understood. All those things are what I think deepen our intimacy. And I think it answers this longing that so many of us discover inside of ourselves, which is the question, there's got to be something more to sex. There just has got to be something more than what I've experienced so far. And it's the meaning that we make of things and our ability to expose some of our inner thoughts and our inner desires to another person and to have that be received. I think is what builds that trust and what builds that safety so that we can actually start to go there.
Oh yeah, so beautiful. And I love, one of the things that I want to highlight that she talked about was how to have these conversations of like, oh, I would like to try this, and setting up your partner for success by saying, hey, I'm a little nervous to tell you about this. And before I go into explaining what I am desiring and why this is what I want to hear back from you. Here are the actual words that I want to hear back. Let me give them to you straight so that it's easy for you to
Get a win.
to hold.
For me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, co-creating those win-wins is an amazing part of what she does.
All right. Well, cool. Thanks, y'all. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us what you think about this episode and what it means to you. And we will catch you next time. Love, love, love.
Much love.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode was hosted by Tantric Sex Master Coach and Positive Psychology Facilitator Leah Piper, as well as by Chinese and Functional Medicine Doctor and Taoist Sexology Teacher Dr. Willow Brown. Don't forget, your comments, likes, subscribes, and suggestions matter. Realize this new world together.